Hello, and welcome to Commander Runningcloud's log. I'm your hostess, Silver Rain Runningcloud. I'm so happy you can join me again. It's after 3 a.m. here in Houston, Texas, and I'm started kind of late today because I work nights more than days for a lot of my life because I'm an empathic kind of person and perhaps autistic as well. So during the day, there are so many energies from people moving around and people, behaving that it keeps me a little more distracted, and I don't feel as comfortable as I do when I actually am at late at night and there's just not as much energy and I can kind of get into a groove. So I learned this about myself in college, actually, when I would discover that around 4 o'clock in the morning I would get inspiration coming in. And when I was a teenager, I used to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. In high school, I just used to be awake at 4 a.m. in Canada when I lived there. And I would look out the window, do things. And I always appreciated the level of energy that you get when you stay up late. So it's kind of late. This will still count as yesterday's transmission. So I'll try to get on earlier today so that I don't look like I'm behind. What I'm going to talk about today is mostly around public broadcasting. It's mostly around public broadcasting because, well, first off, let me say today was a great day for my family. Great day. We had a lot of success today, but because of my targeted individual status and the destruction of my family, we were not together. None of us were together. We were all celebrating each other from far away. But today was one of those days where a mother gets paid, Today was a day when mom got paid because both my children experienced the rewards of their hard work today. And it was just a wonderful day for me. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't get on earlier, too, is that I was actually celebrating my family. And then I tidied up a little bit. Things are getting to be just such a mess around here because I was so depressed. The next point of business that I need to address is to thank the good ETs, the eternal healers, the divine individuals that are working on my health. Since I asked you for help last week, I have felt so much better. Look, see, it's not as bad as it was. It's not as bad as it was at all. And I feel a great deal of relief. However, while you're doing a great job identifying the disease factors and eliminating them without destroying my body, I'm still experiencing some pretty significant invasions in my digestive system, okay, and my circulatory system. So I'm still having some disturbances, but not nearly as bad as it was. Oh my God, if it had been kept progressing along the lines that it was progressing, I would be feeling so horrible right now. But I'm not. I'm not feeling so horrible right now. So being a mother turned out to be the job of my life that I enjoyed the most. And you couldn't have told me this at any point in my life. You couldn't have told me at any point in my life that I was going to really enjoy being a mommy. Because I was always smart in school, so everybody always sort of guided me towards a career. Everybody pretty much, saw me as a working person. And because I'm a Black American We've had our family disturbed for so many generations that women in my family have had to work. So our parents and grandparents prepared us for a life of work. But it wouldn't have made any difference, because even if you're at home and you've got a farm, you're harvesting crops, you're canning crops. I mean, you're being a mother because you're right there, but you're working pretty hard. In fact, when I first decided to be a stay-at-home mother, one of the first things I noticed was I had to work really hard. I was used to coming in and sitting around all day, wasting time at the corporation because there wasn't enough work, even as a computer systems programmer. I mean, once you've written the programs, the company really doesn't need anything from you anymore because the program's already written. And then that Y2K thing came up and everybody got excited. But do you want to know? It was only a matter of data, of databases that had been coded with just two numbers for the date, the year and the date. And when the century changed, it was going to be hard to tell 1919 from 2019 if somebody didn't get in there and do something. But you could have had a back-end processor fix all of that. But they had people actually go in and change the data, which means that you go in, you pull out the program, you find the date, and you change it. It's like it's not as hard as changing a tire at all. It was a really simple job. But you all know what I think about the corporate plantation. I saw more people sitting around all day than I've ever seen in my life. Now, some jobs really make people work hard, but not when you're in management in a corporation. I never saw anybody work that hard unless they wanted to, you know. And somebody said there's a formula called 80-20, that 80% of the people on a job really are lazy and ineffective, and only 20% of the people actually do the work. And we found out in the 1990s and early 2000s, the first decade of the 2000s, when corporations started laying people off and replacing them with automation and really trimming the fat so the investors could get fatter, we saw that a lot of people lost their jobs because they were redundant. They really weren't needed. So today I'm listening to NPR, okay, on the radio. And I'm hearing them promoting war, talking about war. And I start to wonder what would happen in America if American public broadcasting just quit talking about the European wars. What if we just quit talking about it? Wouldn't that be interesting? Because if we quit talking about what's happening in Europe, we could actually learn and address some of the problems that we're having and cut them off before they become critical. Like homelessness for senior citizens, like the failure of Social Security to adequately cover expenses, like the medical system, and how the HMO hierarchy has failed us, except for the investors, right? I mean, what if public broadcasting actually started to do some propaganda for the people instead of propaganda for the management, right? Okay, so I'm going to start. You know, it looks kind of incoherent when you say motherhood reparations and public broadcasting, which is the title of this conversation. But that's pretty much how it came to me. You know, I really wanted to talk about motherhood today, and because I feel so triumphant as a mother because my children are great. To me, that means that every hour I didn't spend working and making money for myself and somebody else, every hour that I spent devoted to my children and the community that they were living in, and every hour that I spent in my car waiting to drive them and chauffeur them around to all of their extracurricular activities, all of those hours, they really made a difference. They really made a difference. My children are incredibly successful. And I don't mean like rich or lots and lots of money. I mean that they have fulfilled their objectives, their purpose in life. They found something they love, and they put all of their energy into it, and they got paid today. They got rewards today. And I just know that I am why. Because I'm the one that gave them access to all that training. And I'm the one that made sure they got there and got home. And I'm the one that made sure they weren't abused while they were there. And I'm the one that made sure that they were given a great deal of respect, because I was there working to pull it all off. I was there working with the things that they did, working in their school, working in their ballet company, working in their scout troops, working in their track, swimming, mostly as a spectator for things like that, but getting them to the practices and just being in the audience, being in the audience. So I feel so good about my children today, but I feel so sad that our society has ruined motherhood for so many other women. So many other women cannot enjoy the feeling that I'm having today, right? Because I was so lucky. I married a man who wanted to go to medical school. I helped and supported him so he got there, and I stood by his side all through the process. And then when he finished, and we had children. Actually, I got pregnant before he finished. God's work, not mine. We didn't really expect to be pregnant quite before he graduated, but the baby was only going to be 4 months old when he finished. So that was going to give us plenty of time to give our baby a good life, because I felt it was very important for me to have a stable home. And we were married for 8 years before we had the baby. And when we had the baby, everything changed. Seriously, I was interviewing babysitters. When the baby was brand new, when I still had 5 weeks of leave left. I had my babysitter hired before I even had the baby, because I thought I was just going to drop this baby and go back to work. It never occurred to me that I was going to have such a powerful emotional connection that the day I had to go back to work, I cried. I didn't want anybody else to take care of my precious little baby. So my doctor gave me medical permission to take another week. So I was able to take 7 weeks of maternity leave, but it still wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. I'm telling you. I suffered being apart from my baby. I suffered very much. But I had a job as a computer programmer with First National Bank of Chicago in the trust department, ironically enough, considering how many of my trusts have been robbed by family and by government agencies and legal entities. Isn't that funny? So ironic. But I was working in the trust department at First National Bank of Chicago, and we did not have any work. I mean, nothing was coming through the pipeline, because they were about to bring it all online into computers, but they didn't just want to drop us all, right? So we were just lingering on and on and on and on. In fact, the reason why I quit my job and lived on my savings was because I said, you know what? I don't trust this freaking babysitter. I don't trust her. She's stealing food from me. She's not taking proper care of my baby. And I'm spending my day sitting here on my hiney, doing nothing just for the money. And how much is it costing me to be here? What am I paying for dry cleaning? What am I paying for pantyhose? I walked to work because I lived right in downtown Chicago, so I could walk to work. So my transportation costs weren't high. But I was eating in restaurants for breakfast and lunch. I didn't eat lunch, but breakfast or lunch, I was eating in the restaurant. So it was costing me to work, right? So I took my little savings and I just started to stay home after a certain point with my baby. I think it was probably once my husband started a real job. But by then the HMOs had taken over. We were planning for him to go into private practice, and I was going to be the community builder office manager, and he has such a wonderful personality, my ex-husband. Everybody loves him. So we knew we'd have lots and lots of patience. I remember the day he took care of Emmett Till's mother at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago. And he came home from work that day and he said, you know what? Today I got to do the job I've dreamed of since I dreamed of being a doctor. I got to take care of Emmett Till's mother. You see, because he wanted to be a part of the community. He wanted to be a doctor for the people that he knew and loved, the people that meant something to him. But by then, all the MBAs that they had manufactured had ruined HMO, had created HMOs as a layer of management between everyone. And they did it because a lot of public broadcasting started saying doctors are committing outrageous malpractice. They must be stopped. They're a lawless bunch. There's so much malpractice. Look at this one. Look at this one. Look at that one. And public broadcasting degraded the trust in the country doctor, in the man with the black bag who'd come to your house to give you penicillin if you had the flu. He'd get in his car, come to your house, and he had a community of people that he would take care of from the time that they were babies until they became senior citizens, if they could. And that was just such an important anchor in the community, such an important part of the community. But HMOs ruined it. HMOs centralized medical care, and more people have suffered from terrible health, drug addiction, and all other kinds of, and emotional loss. Some people go to the doctor because they're so lonely and so unloved in this society that they go for medical care so they can be around people that are acting like they care about them. Did you know that? Do you know how many people schedule doctor's appointments because they've substituted doctor's appointments for love? And the doctors are not even loving anymore in many cases. But my husband went to medical school during the transition, before Ronald Reagan increased the student loan debt to 20%, up from 3% and up to 7% and then to 20%. So if you're graduating from medical school, you're going to be paying a mortgage on a multi-million-dollar house, for your debt load. And all that came while we were in medical school. All of that transition came while we were in medical school. You see, I'm at the end of the baby boom. So all the strategies for holding back and containing and ruining life for baby boomers, those kind of were going away because I come in with the next generation. I'm at the end of the baby boom, 1956, the very end of the baby boom. So we were the transitional generation. We weren't the hippies. The hippies were the last big hooray of the baby boom. And the hippies protested the Vietnam War, which means that everybody in that generation objected to war as a way of life. But somehow they were overridden. They were completely overridden. And if you read that article, that booklet that I gave you from Gene Decoder's website, from about a secret war, silent war, secret battle, silent war, you can see that it was a strategy that's been so effective, because every single strategy in that economic formula for controlling the masses leads to war. War was the only outcome that the enemy was seeking. So for them to learn to silence the entire generation of hippies took some doing. But by the time we got to January 6th and the Sandy Hook decisions, most people who were already beaten into cowardice didn't want to challenge what the broadcasters said was going to happen. People just didn't want to challenge it because the risks were too great. So we've seen motherhood become something very difficult to achieve. We've seen a society that has used the power of economics to control our family life and keep us from doing what we want to do. In terms of public broadcasting, the public broadcasters made a very big deal about Gloria Steinem and feminism, and made the women that wanted to be mothers sound like, unactualized people. They made mothers sound like they were going to be lacking some kind of very important thing. And I'm not saying that women shouldn't work. Work is great. And working in the public for corporations, fantastic, right? But there has to be respect for motherhood in all of that. None of us would be here without mothers. And the quality of motherhood makes a big difference on the happiness of the individuals that live to adulthood, right? I mean, if you're able to make your own goals, and then you've got parents, see, because it wasn't just me, because my husband at the time, my first husband, my only husband, my ex-husband, he paid for everything, and he let me do everything my way. If I notice that we've got a child that has a certain talent or interest, I would make sure I give them a more exposure to that so they can make a more informed decision. And if they want more, I give them more. If they want to join organizations that will take them further, I make sure they get there. I find the organizations. I make sure they get there. But their father paves the way. Their father made sure that there was a car for transportation. Their father made sure that there was gas in the car for transportation. Their father made sure the fees and tuitions and travel expenses for other activities, he made sure all of that would be paid. So if I've got a child who achieves so much that she gets accepted in a dance camp with Maria Tallchief, who's going to pay? If you don't have a husband without resentment for you staying at home, a husband that's willing to pay the bills and make the way. There's something about actually carrying the spirit of another person in your own body that has a very profound effect on a person. I didn't think that I was going to have such strong feelings until my children were born. And my daughter, I didn't even pretend. I didn't even pretend that I wasn't going to stay home with my daughter after a certain point. After a certain point, when my client really started to act racist and get in my way and make my work life affect my mood at home, I had this one crisis one day where I've got the two children and they're crying because they haven't had breakfast yet. And my house is a mess. There are dirty clothes everywhere. I can't find my stockings. I can't find my shoes. The children are crying. I haven't fed them. I've got to drive an hour to the babysitter, then 3 hours to the site in Elgin. So I have to go from the far south side of Chicago all the way to Elgin, Illinois, to meet with my client. So I'm leaving like at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning for a 2 o'clock appointment. And when I come back, I got to go through, come back, and go pick up my kids. So I'm going to have a horrible day. And this is a client that had me working within 3 weeks of major surgery. I had to have major surgery. I had to have blood transfusions because I was working so hard before my daughter was born, that she was born 3 weeks early from placentia abruptio. That means my placenta fell off my uterus and it was developing blood behind the baby, that you have a pocket of blood and bleeding. Then you've got the amniotic sac in the baby, and then you've got the birth canal, the cervix and the birth canal. So I had lost so much blood that I had to have 3 units of saline because AIDS was out then. And they were screening the blood for AIDS, but they were still so worried about AIDS that they were giving saline for fluid retention instead of actual plasma, I believe. They might have had to give me plasma. So I was unconscious when my daughter gained consciousness. And she was born with an emergency cesarean from an expert physician who lived on the Gold Coast of Chicago and worked out of St. Joseph's Hospital, one of the best private hospitals on the Gold Coast. And that's where my children were born. That was a hospital where they give you lobster for your first meal after the baby. You and your husband get a lobster dinner in the hospital room to celebrate the birth of your new child. So by the time I had my daughter, and I've got this client, that's being uber demanding, super demanding. And, they're setting me up, because all the Europeans are angry that I'm making, so much money and they have to pay. And they're challenging me. I had to write a 10-page report because he says, we want to know everything you've done, every single thing you've done, because they're challenging our pay. I had to write this 10-page report, and I go through the whole report, and they're still arguing with me. I wrote this 10-page report, right? And I'm 3 weeks out of major surgery. Okay. So I stay on with the company. So no, actually, he called me within a week of me having the baby saying, well, can you work remotely? We have a data center in downtown Chicago. You can call in on your modem to the data center. Will you work remotely? So I'm working remotely within 7 days of the baby. I'm walking around with a pillow held to my stomach because I somehow can't believe that you can have a scar from your navel to your hip line, straight down your belly, and your guts won't fall out. I'm still in a state of disbelief that I could really have been cut wide open and then sewn back again, and I'm not going to fall out. So I'm still walking around holding a pillow, right? And my client is calling me. Can you work? Can you work? Can you work? And I've got the agencies that had me. I was doing contracting with different agencies who could get in, and they wouldn't let me in, but they let the European agencies in as an interface so that all of the useless, children of investors could make money off of slaves. So we get in there, and they're calling me too, right? When I got home from Elgin, from that day in Elgin, I said, I quit. I am never going to work for anybody again. Because I'm subcontracting with his company, and they're going to do a whole political persecution of me again. That's all I saw from the Europeans out there. So then I start, to plan on developing my own company to make video games. And I start doing my business plan and my research, and, and looking forward to the day when virtual reality becomes reality, and knowing that day is going to come, and figuring out how to use linguistics to create programs that can duplicate language. I'm doing all this work, right? Because I said I'm never going to work for anybody again. And I already had founded Crystal Data Systems. I'd founded Crystal Data Systems the day that Moynihan's law came out. And he said, no more third-party contracting, because we were building too much wealth from the upper middle class, from the non-elites. And Reagan's whole job was pushing everybody down. That was his whole shtick. He started with breaking up air traffic controller unions. Now imagine if the public broadcasting had presented these stories with this point of view, more guided towards liberating American small business from being consumed by European investors and European nationalism. Imagine if public broadcasting had had a different bias than the bias that it had. But the bias in public broadcasting is absolutely anti-American. When we look at the kinds of stories that public broadcasting through NPR actually do, PBS, when we look at the broadcasting, the stories they do, the bias they assume, the frequency of stories, the stories they choose not to do, including the story of Silver Rain Runningcloud, we're able to find a certain pattern. a pattern over time. We find a certain pattern, and I believe that when I get to the point where I'm helping to prosecute the offenders that we need reparations from, National Public Radio, NPR, and the FCC are definitely going to be on the list of defendants because they have behaved in ways that are absolutely un-American, anti-American broadcasting. Okay? Anti-American broadcasting. Because we all know that in America, the reason that we love the idea of America and the ideal of America is because America is the one place in third dimensional space where we say citizens are guaranteed certain rights and privileges that all lead to freedom, liberty, and self-determination. With the belief that when we're free, we will come up with the best solutions because it'll be organic. It'll organically bubble up the best solutions and the best ways for us to live. They'll just automatically bubble up if we are allowed to be free and liberated. So when the enemies of America were pacifying the natives, they took into account our way of life, our community ethics, our morality, our belief in the power of the individual and individual achievement and rewarding individual achievement. Like I said, chiefs were not elected. Chiefs were not born to chiefs. Chiefs earned their power through their responsible behavior to the community. And frequently the women of the tribe who had actually raised the boys. Frequently the women in the tribe that raised the boys were the ones with input into who the next chief would be. Right? Because motherhood was important. Fatherhood was important. The fathers would hunt. The fathers would provide. And the women would use their bodies to have children, to feed children, and to make sure children got trained. And the fathers were very important training children too. Training children how to protect the community, right? Training children what the stories and the histories were, what the stories are. And through the stories of your elders, that's how you learn the values that have been tested over time and the values that the tribe wants you to adhere to. You see? Because peer pressure is with us all of our lives. All of our lives, we are subject to peer pressure. So if we've got public broadcasting creating community standards that are in opposition to the standards organically in the people, then we've got huge distortion, don't we? Huge distortion. We've got distortion between what our conscience tells us and what we know is right and what we organically believe. And all of that can get negated by public broadcasting. The European hippies did not believe in war. They believed in peace and love and peace, right? And they were pretty adamant about it. They made so many protests to the Vietnamese War. They taught people how to avoid the draft by going to Canada. Now, Muhammad Ali actually went to jail for not going in the draft, which was totally against his freedom. He had every right to object to war. But already we were being consumed. We're already being consumed by the European nationalist ideology and commitment to war. And you can read about it in that article I posted. And it's as clear as can be. And all you have to do is reverse engineer your reality to come to the same conclusions. And you'll find that the documents are just confirmation of what you already know and what you already feel. Because all of us are getting messages from God, aren't we? All of us have a conscience, right? And when public broadcasting teaches us that there will be risks and consequences to us following our consciences, we all just have to go along, don't we? Because we don't want to go to jail like Muhammad Ali did for saying we're not going to go to Vietnam so you can smuggle drugs and murder us and kill us so you can take over our property and our inheritances. We're not going to go. I hear the Europeans want another draft. So they're banging the drum on PBS. They talk to us constantly. The Europeans talk to us about their war. And when they're not talking about their war, they're saying, these people are your enemies. They're already brewing something with the Europeans in Russia and the Europeans in America by way of the Ukraine and the NATO commitment to defend the Europeans using American assets, aren't they? Aren't they? And don't you think that NPR is contributing to that by constantly inundating us with their predictive programming? That there's going to be war, when they really should be teaching us about all the shenanigans going on in cyberspace. They really should be telling us what's on a Starlink satellite. They really should be telling us why Apple is allowed to be a monopoly and have surveillance built into their devices. They really should be reflecting more of what real Americans want, or more of what real Americans need, more of what we need to protect ourselves. But instead, we have NPR working for the enemies of America. They talk about other countries from such a clearly Eurocentric, judgmental bias. But they are creating images and representations of people from other races and other cultures that they have no right to create. And they're not talking about us. And we have so much to talk about. So many Americans are suffering. So many Americans are so lonely that their hearts are crying out in pain because our society has been sliced and diced and Cousinarted until we're all practically insane. And we don't even have a mother looking out for us, waiting for us when we get home. We don't even have a grandma that we can go to who can tell us all these things will pass. I've lived through plenty. We don't have anybody. We don't have anybody. And then we hear, oh, get therapy, get therapy, get therapy. And what happens when you go for therapy? Well, when I went for therapy, the last time I went for therapy, I'll tell you the last few times I went for therapy. And those are just some of the times. And I was considered mentally ill for about a decade, I'm going to say. About a decade. At least a decade. They found my depression over being the victim of European nationalist racism getting in the way of me reaching my potential over and over again everywhere I went. I can't do motherhood the way I want to. I can't do corporate life in my business, my small business, the way I want to. I can't do academia the way I want to, right? They blocked me everywhere. Well, who's not going to be depressed about that, right? But once you get in with depression and you've got Big Farm and all those investors who have been told there's going to be a huge increase in the income, there's going to be a lot of money coming, then I just become a digit, right? I just become a widget and a digit in their system. I just become one of the customers for their mental health industry. And I got to see it go from here with talk therapy, from people who were really motivated to help people survive mental distress and misery, to where it was where the doctor hardly even showed up to his office. He was probably addicted to drugs. He would just come in every now and then to write a prescription. I remember sitting in the office of this doctor in Middletown. I can't tell you how many appointments he just blew off. And his only function was to write a prescription for the newest antidepressant drug. Because with no solutions to my life, I wasn't stopping being depressed, right? And once you get caught up in the medication wheel, you feel like you're being proactive. Okay, I'm depressed, but I'm taking my meds, so I'm doing good. I'm doing all I can. And then you get your family joining in the chorus. Did you take your meds? Did you take your meds? You're having emotions, and your emotions are making us feel something. So quit your emotions, Mom. Take your meds. Quit your emotions, honey. Take your meds. Take your meds. So taking your meds becomes your way of dealing with the failures in our society to address our human needs, to fulfill our purpose, to reach our goals and experience the joy of achievement and success. And then to be recognized by our tribe for our successes. I mean, that's what humans want. That's what humans want. That's what makes us feel good. And you cannot NPR it away. You cannot make us care more about a war from foreign people who want to fight each other. If the Europeans want to kill each other, let them at it. But don't make it our problem. When we have enough problems with them and their secret silent war against us ourselves. Let us identify the strategies of war that they're using on us. Let us talk about solutions. But if we've got public radio and public broadcasting and PBS constantly diverting our attention, just like it said in the strategies, if we've got that to deal with, then we're never going to have the power and control that we need to define our own public spaces. So public broadcasting creates moral values that used to be created by women gossiping, would create moral values. Fathers telling stories to their children created moral values. Lectures from the elders in public spaces like parties and events, actual training events, initiations, coming of age events. In all of these ways, the tribes of America and of the world have been able to impart the moral values that would keep the tribe surviving, prosperous, and protected. But starting with feminism and Gloria Steinem, the lesbian, with no concern about family values, because lesbians generally do not plan to have families. And I believe that lesbians are born lesbians for the most part. There are a percentage of desperate women who couldn't get a man, so they go for women, and that's just true. I'm sorry. That's just true. I mean, I remember when I was in college, I couldn't get a man. I couldn't get a boyfriend. And I started to think, well, maybe I'm a lesbian, right? But when I hit on somebody, she was revolted. So I said, ooh, I didn't like that feeling. I don't think I'm going to do that again because I don't like the response I got. Now, if I was really a lesbian, I wouldn't have let that stop me, right? I would have pushed on. So I did kind of push on. A couple of years later, I still don't have a boyfriend. So I know this girl who's obviously a lesbian. So I go to visit her, not to be seduced or have sex with her, but just to find out more about the lifestyle, right? But she was so used to people being revolted to her that she was just warrior-like. I mean, she was warlike. She was like, what are you here to tease me, to harass me, to spit on me? This is what she said because she could tell I was heterosexual. and I wasn't a lesbian. She didn't get the lesbian vibe off me. She thought I was a looky-loo, right? A looky-loo, and she'd already been offended and hurt. And she was on high anger. So I was like, oh wow, well, I'm definitely not a lesbian, okay? I definitely am a heterosexual. Not that I needed to be told, but anybody, can do sex with anybody, right? I mean, if you can do sex with a sex toy, you can do sex with anybody, but that's not the point. The point is about having ethics and values and not being promiscuous with your passions, because then your life loses a whole level of meaning when you throw the sacredness of physical intimacy away. I remember a homosexual man had a date with me. I met him on Match.com, and he was so handsome. He actually showed me where the gay clubs in New Haven were by the red light. He said, you see that red light? That's how you know there's a gay club there. The red light. There'd be a red light. The place would look totally shut down, totally dark, but there'd be a red light on the porch. And he said, that's how you find the gay places. But he was so exciting. I mean, we never had sex because I didn't want to risk getting AIDS. And also, we were just dating. I was just getting to know him. So I was asking him, I said, well, you're bisexual. Why are you looking for a wife? Because he was looking for a wife. And he said, because most homosexuals are not looking to build family security. It's more about sex. And they're not looking to build family security. And I'm getting older. So I want family security. And that's why I want to get married. That's why I want a woman. Because women make homes. And I want a home because I'm getting older. And I was like, really found that interesting. Of course, I knew that wasn't going to be my way. I wasn't going to be somebody's home. And I asked him, I said, well, would you still be participating bisexually? And he was like, absolutely. I couldn't give that up, right? So here he was, a homosexual who could tolerate women. But who knew if he was really going to get in your house and perform as your sexual partner? I mean, he's probably going to get in your home and then have his sex life someplace else with men, because he's really gay. But but he was so exciting because oh my goodness, he gave me such a wonderful sexual experience, with my breasts in public. He just sort of jumped on me in public and just put his mouth so nobody could see. And we're just right there in downtown New Haven on my car, and it was really fun. It was right outside a gay club, but I think he was just trying to prove something to me. But by then I had left Yale, and just being disrespectful to Yale in that way just gave me such a thrill. But oh my goodness, see, I appreciate him for that. But I also appreciate him for his honesty. He told me the deal that I would be making if I hooked up with him, if I continued with him. He let me know, I'm a homosexual, but I'm looking for a home. You're an old woman. I was 40 by then, right? You're an older woman. You're looking for a boyfriend. I know you don't have a lot of choices because you're Black in Connecticut and you're upper class. So I know your selection pool is low because men in your class, they're looking for a European woman. They want to trade up. They don't want to peer. They want to trade up. So I know you are probably desperate. But I wasn't desperate. But that would have been his assessment of me, because that was my reality. That's the reality I was facing. So he wanted a home, right? Because women make homes. I used to define when I had to fill out an application, say occupation, I used to put homemaker, because I was making a home. I made a home. Now, my mother, she wanted to raise her children. She really wanted to do that, but she had to frequently become an employee. And one of the jobs that she took when she was young, before she became a lawyer, but she still had me. In fact, she had to drop out of Hunter College Law School in New York because I was born. Yeah, she had to take care of me instead of becoming a lawyer way back when. She had to wait until I was in college to go to law school again. But by then, she was married to my stepfather, a neurosurgeon. She had a settlement, because they divorced, but she got a settlement so she could go back to school and she could go to law school. And she went to Loyola Law School in Chicago and she graduated and she had a practice subsidized by my stepfather with a prestigious address. And she traveled and she bought land and she learned about investments and she became the president of the Cook County Bar Association. And then she became an elected judge in the Circuit Court of Chicago, Cook County Circuit Court judge. And she retired as a Cook County Circuit Court judge by not running in the next election. The last election, she took 2 terms. She was elected twice. And she used to campaign right outside of Jewel Food Store because the Europeans were trying to block her. They had a Jew running as the judge in the black neighborhood that included Hyde Park. In that district, they had a Jew running for all the black people to be the judge. But my mother, so she wasn't endorsed at first by the alderman. She had to get out there and hoof it. She would be out in front of the Jewel on 87th Street, giving her flyers out saying, I'm running for judge, elect me. I'm running for judge, elect me. I mean, she ran elections both times. She'd go to her church, St. Mark's, AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal Church. She'd go to her church and she would be there and she'd visit other churches to announce her candidacy. My mom worked hard for those elections because the Europeans didn't want to elect her. And then when she got in, she did some activism. When the Europeans would come in with a lawyer on these, she did some activism, so they reduced her to traffic court. At first, she was in Cook County building in downtown Chicago, the big, tall, black skyscraper. She was on like the 22nd floor or something, because I remember going to visit her. But she would be fair. She wouldn't side with the European corporations the way that the European nationalist leadership wanted her to. She valued justice and fairness. I mean, we heard so much about justice and fairness growing up because it was my grandmother's value. My grandmother was extremely spiritual. She studied with the black Muslims. And then when she saw that it was kind of racialized, she studied Muslim Islam. She studied pure Islam. And she believed in God, and she taught us to believe in God. And she believed in demons, and she taught us how to protect ourselves from demons with prayers to God. My grandmother was the most influential person in my spiritual life. But imagine if I'd never gotten to know her. Imagine if there still weren't fragments of the agricultural roots where my mother and grandmother would be living together at some point in time, and that would be all right. Of course, it was caused because of the way the people running real estate in New York and the small business that she ran was cheated. They were cheated out of business. So they had to live in the same house. They had to. But it still gave me a wonderful opportunity to know my grandmother and my grandfather, to know them both. And they both contributed to me becoming a stable, wholesome person with high self-esteem. My life from 1 to 6, from birth to 6 years old, was filled with so much love and domestic security in so many ways that it was enough to sustain me for my lifetime through all the years of alienation, all the years I had to make it by myself from the time of the divorce till this very day. Those years are what gave me my foundation because I had so much love And even though we had problems happening, my father was having problems with alcoholism, and he was psychic, and it wasn't really, so he was having visions and things, and we didn't really know what to do with psychic way back then. It looked more like crazy. And if you were having psychic visions of tragedies and those tragedies were coming, when you know tragedy's coming, you can start being miserable before the bad event, right? And ironically, I'm usually more upset before the terrible thing happens than I am by the time the terrible thing happens and after the terrible thing happens, because I have the feeling that it's coming, but I can't pinpoint anything. I just feel terrible. And then the horrible thing happens and I say, oh, that was it. It's like popping a pimple or something, It's not a beautiful, good thing. But once you've gotten rid of the sebaceous cells, you feel less pressure on you and you look a little better. There might be a scar, but, a scar is better than an active infection, an active eruption. We have a lot of value to parenthood, a lot of value to motherhood. And I'm going to leave this here, but I'm going to come back and talk about motherhood as a separate topic. And the prosecution that we need to execute on public broadcasters for undermining American values and interfering with our rights to happiness by putting bad thoughts in our head and doing mind control. I will talk about that in another broadcast and in the next broadcast. And I will talk about reparations more as well, because these things are related to reparations in this way. Public broadcasting is broadcasting things, creating mind control, creating public values, creating ethics that are in direct opposition to the success of Black and Native Americans, who collectively are the indigenous people. So NPR and PBS can systematically be proven to be acting against the interests of indigenous American people because they do not tell us the things we need to know. They are on the public square. They are controlling the stories, yet they do not tell the story of Silver Rain Runningcloud. And the things that are happening to me, to victimize me, are happening to many, many, many other people in different degrees. The theft of real estate, the failure of the probate courts, the corruption of the courts, the persecution from the courts, the fines of the courts. There's so many aspects of the story that need to be told to raise public awareness so that public pressure gets put in place, so that we actually have elections instead of appointments supported by a fake election system. You see, it all becomes intertwined, but instead of reporting about the ballots that are stolen, aldermen that are paid off, all the things that I know for a fact are happening just because of what my mother told me when she was running for election. We all know this. We all know about the corruption. But as long as NPR and PBS prefer to talk about January 6th, look what's going to happen to you if you call them out. We're going to kill you. We're going to get you and put you in jail if you call them out. See the public dialogue? Oh, they're saying there was election fraud, but that's not true. And then they declare somebody president, and all the public broadcasters just keep broadcasting the decisions that this person has made instead of invalidating it. There are so many examples of the way public radio, through NPR, public television, through PBS, have betrayed the best interests of Americans and indigenous people, most importantly. So as a part of reparations is not only going to invalidate deeds and titles that came out of midair, that had nothing to do with the people that were on that land, nothing to do with ownership. just a piece of paper. So it's not only going to invalidate all those deeds and titles to stolen land, but it's also going to look at the mind control effects of public broadcasting and the way public broadcasting has presented a public mindset that hurts every other race except the Europeans. Every other race is getting slaughtered, either through their reporters going to another country and reporting negative things about that country that make Americans feel like, oh, everybody else is poor and corrupt, or whether they're lying about election fraud and presenting, this is the consequences. If you speak up, you're going to go down like Alex Jones. You're going to have to sell everything you've ever achieved, right? But they don't say that everything my mother ever achieved and was left to me got stolen. They're not going to report that. They're not going to say that Silver Rain Runningcloud can't even go into Oklahoma where she's got plenty of land because the courts will set a, what do you call it? Dragnet out for her because they want to seize my land. They stole the land from my trust. Both my trusts. I have 2 trust funds of land in Oklahoma. And when it comes to Nevada and what my stepfather left me, I go to Bullhead City, Nevada, and I got trackers tracking me. I got people show up just to watch me because they know my stepfather owns a lot of stuff there, and they're trying to see what I know about it. Where do I go visit? Do I know my stepfather owns that building? Do I know my stepfather owns that mine? Do I know my stepfather owns that ruin? They want to see what I know. But NPR, public radio, they should be reporting on that, because if I am an heiress of America and my family was able to reach the pinnacle of success by becoming neurosurgeon and judge, that's a pinnacle of professional success in America. So my inheritance is hefty. If my hefty inheritance can be stolen and your people are striving, what's going to happen when your people reach the pinnacle of success that my people have reached? Will you be robbed too? Well, I'll tell you one thing for sure. As long as public radio and PBS is not telling you about it, as long as you're having Henry Louis Gates telling you, you were slaves. Let me show you your slave great, 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 great granddaddy. Yeah, you're a slave. You're less than Europeans because they brought you here and you're obliged. That's what they're going to show on PBS through Finding Your Roots, right? But they're not going to say, well, Silver Rain Runningcloud was never a slave. Her family were not slaves. They were always landowners. They were always hardworking. They always had civic responsibilities. Why her grandfather even created Lima, Oklahoma, one of the original colored cities back in 1913. Well, I think he was there by 1919. 1919? And the Europeans drove them off. Those are the stories we need to be saying to ourselves, because that's our heritage. That's our history. And by knowing the past, we can protect and pave our way to the future. So that's why this becomes an issue for reparations, right? And that's why it's very important for us to get Reparations International Court and prosecute public radio and public television for creating anti-American public thinking, public awareness, public discourses. Okay? So, motherhood, reparations, public broadcasting. My next broadcast will tell more about all of those things. Thank you for joining me. Thank you so much. Please like and subscribe. I want to be dominant in the industry, just like everybody else who's producing out here. I don't get no likes. But I get to stay alive and out of jail. So I guess, don't like me.